it's Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm, and today we're going to learn how to make Bernie's mittens, or recycled mittens using upcycled sweaters. I was really happy to see this when all this came to be. There are lots of ways to make mittens using recycled sweaters. Sweaters are a real fun way to recycle the knitted fabric in order to make mittens. So Bernie's mittens, the teacher that's making them with him, I don't know, I've looked at pictures, I don't know if they're lined, but I'm going to assume they are lined because it would make added warmth. So I'm going to make these pair for my daughter. So I'm just using a cotton flannel for the inside, and I have a pattern, and I will upload it so you can use the link and make your own pattern and print off your own pattern. So I just have some cotton flannel, and this just had some dog prints on it to make it easier to see when we're sewing. But that will increase the warmth inside of the knitted fabric. If you have a really thick sweater, you're probably not going to need any kind of lining, but this is sort of thin. There are many ways you can do recycled mittens, and I'm going to show you the style that Bernie had, but let me show you real quick a different way you can do it. If you have a long sleeve, and the little dress I have short sleeves, so these wouldn't only work if I was doing like a little child size. But if you have a long sleeve one, let's just assume this is the sleeve here. So let's say this was the sleeve right here and it ended. You could put your mitten pattern right there on the sleeve and cut it and sew it, and you'd already have your cuff. You could also use the bottom of a sweater, and we're going to be just taking the cuff off the bottom, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do that because I'm going to be trying to do Bernie style. But if you didn't want to do the whole thing that I'm going to do, you could just lay your pattern right here on the cuff, cut it, and sew it, and you wouldn't have to do anything else. Using the cuff the way we're going to be using it will make the bottom a little tighter than the top, and that allows the warmth to stay in. So the first thing that's important to remember when we're doing the pattern is we have a right hand, and then we're going to flip our pattern, and we'll have a left hand. You don't want to cut them unless you're doing everything solid and there's no pattern or anything. Then you could do whatever. You could just do this because you could just turn over your mittens, and it would be a right hand, left hand. But so what I'm going to do, I'm choosing where I want the pattern to be. The other reason why I like a liner is because we're dealing with a knit fabric. When you sew it, it's going to tend to want to splay outwards. The knit, the ribs are going to want to spread. If you have a liner fabric that you can attach, you can sew the knitted fabric to the flannel. It's going to act as a stabilizer, and it's not going to do that as much. And I'm using both sides because I need a front and a back. You could also, if you had multiple sweaters, and I think Bernie's were like that, he had the front was different than the back. And you can see how the edges are sort of delicate because it's knitted fabric, so it will come apart. So that's why I think having the flannel as a liner helps with that problem. And we will trim away whatever we don't use here before we construct the rest of the mittens. I just want to So what we're going to end up having is 4 pieces that we're going to pin to our liners, and then we're going to sew those, and then we'll for each mitten, that's what I mean. So we'll have 8 pieces total to make the pair of mittens. And we're not going to turn these inside out. We're going to be zigzagging these to the liner. We will turn it inside out when we get to the point where we're actually making the mitten. But right now we're just attaching the knitted fabric to the flannel liner. For the sweater we're going to need is the cuff. And on the burning ones, what they have done is they've sewn them on the inside and they've folded the cuffs up and over the mitten. So mitten and the cuff will come up and over. It's going to be cute. So we're going to also use this part of the bottom. I'm using the bottom. You can use the sleeve cuffs, but I'm going to use this. Has this nice decorative thing down here, and I'm going to use this cuff. And I'm just going to cut right here for right now. These two pieces. I'm not going to cut it to exact measurements yet because I want to see after we get it sewn, and we're going to sew the two pieces together, and then we're going to sew for one, like this is the front and the back, and we're going to sew one side together. Then we will cut our cut to the width of the flat open mitten, and it will be sewn on there, and then we'll fold it over. So we're going to wait and cut the exact dimensions after we get the mitten sewn, so we know. So we're working with knitted fabric and recycled fabric. Sometimes there's variations that you want to allow for, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to save these two pieces, and we will come back and do the cuff after we get the stabilizing flannel sewed to the inside of the mitten. So let's go do the sewing, and we will come back to the cuff. Alright, I'm just going to zigzag my knitted fabric onto my flannel fabric, and then we will look at how we're going to construct the cuff. Remove all the pins and trim up the flannel around it. I've also went ahead and cut out a hat out of the same sweater so I can make a matching hat. Okay, once I have these trimmed up, I'm going to lay them right sides together, and we're going to just sew the one side, and then we're going to work on the cuff. For this straight stitch on those, just the one side, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do the cuff. Just so you know, I'm really not going to go into it because this is just sort of a side story on the mittens. If you want to make a hat, just find a good portion of your sweater. You need two parts. You can just get an existing hat that you already have that you know that fits well, or you can use the green round loom and just use like a half of it, the semicircle. Cut it in a semicircle, and we're going to go zigzag around here and do a straight stitch. And then I have cut, this was a turtleneck sweater, so I cut the turtleneck, and I'm going to attach that to be folded over to make the cuff, the outside. Okay, I'm going to do a straight stitch up this longer side, not the thumb side, but the palm side. Do a zigzag stitch next to that. So here's what we have so far. This is the side of the mitten. So this would be the side you'd be looking at. We're going to put the cuff down on here. So we want to open it up. So that's what we're doing, sewing this long side. So let me do this other one, and then we'll get over it and we'll look at the cuff. Just a little hat. I'm going to go hit it with an iron to make it the seams lay flatter, but there's the hat, so that was easy. Okay, so we have our mittens sewn onto the lining fabric, and we have our two sections that we cut for the cuff. We are going to be sewing it with the right side of the print touching the right side of the lining. This might seem weird. Here's the reason why. When we get done sewing it, we're going to fold it all the way over, and the cuff is going to come up over the mittens. Now there's other ways you can do it, like I first talked about how you can cut it directly out of the bottom cuff, or if you have a turtleneck, or if you're cutting it from the sleeve. So there's different ways to do it. But when I looked at the pictures of the Bernie mitten, his cuff came up and over, so that's what we're going to do. This also solves the problem of what to do with the bottom part of this instead of having to put some kind of trim or something. Since we didn't turn the mitten and lining inside out, we have to cover up this bottom, and that's the way it will work. Alright, I went ahead and finished one glove so we can look at it, so you can see what I'm talking about when I'm doing it. So we have the outside, or the right side, whatever we want to call it, of the glove or mitten, and we have done our stitching around there, and I have cut the bottom part of the sweater where the cuff, the ribbed cuff that goes around the waist is, and this is about 4.5 inches long. And if you notice, we have the right side of the mitten that you can see when you're wearing it on your hand. We have the lining, and then we have where the cuff is, and the right side, or the external part of the cuff that will be visible when it's on your hand, is touching the inside lining. And the reason why is because when we sew it on, we're going to fold it up and over the top. So it's going to be a cuff. Alright, so we're going to go over and we're going to do a straight stitch, then we're going to trim it, and then I'm going to do probably a couple rows of the zigzagging to make sure all the edges are connected. And then we're going to be sewing we'll be turning it like this, and we'll be sewing the mitten together. We will not be sewing this part of it, the cuff part, until we turn the mitten inside out, because since we're flipping it over and folding it up, the seam is going to have to be on the other side, so it won't be visible. So we sort of have to do that after we're done. So let's go do the stitching, and we will come back and look at the finished mittens. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is, I should also add real quick that you want the cuff to be about 4.5 inches, and you want to leave about 1 inch on each side. That's going to give us, so it's going to be wider than your mitten, and that's going to give us room to go in and do that other seam and do some zigzagging to make sure our edges are secure when we get it folded over. Remember, it's better to err on the side of excess than not enough. You can always fix it if there's too much. You can't always fix it if there's not enough. So leave about 1 inch on each side. This one I have a little bit more than 1 inch, but that's okay because we're going to trim it all off. So right now I'm just going to go across, and I'm going to do a straight stitch. Okay, so now we have the cuff on, and you can see how it's going to fold up and over the mitten when it's finished. So this is what we got. It looks like it's on the wrong side, but that's the way we want it, because we're going to flip it over, and here's the liner. Alright, now we're going to put our mitten together. We really want to push it flat and really work with those seams, because you're working with all these bulky layers, so you really need to make sure that you have everything smooth, and when you get it done sewing, you're going to have all your fabric doing the right thing and not folded or creased or any of that. Okay. Alright. We're not going to do anything with this until we flip it over. So right now we're just going to go around and do a straight stitch. And I'm working directly underneath that zigzag line. To do the lining so there are no seams, but it gets pretty involved and there's no point making an easy craft project that involved unless you are one of the kind of people that want your inside to look as immaculate as the outside. So I've trimmed it up and now I'm going to go around and zigzag the edges once more. Turn it right side out and then we will work on the cuff. Fold it back out. We'll get it to lay flat. Even it up. Okay, I'm going to do a straight stitch. Cuff over. You can see how the inside of the mitten, and there's our cuff. And instead of cutting this little bit that I have right here, fabric, you can't just snip it. Remember, whenever you snip something, it might unravel. So I'm just going to take that, I'm going to push it under there, and I'm going to take some of the same thread. I'm just going to hand stitch that little bit of the hem, or the seam, under. Alright, I'm checking for loose stitches, and now let's go over and look at the finished mittens and the hat. So here are our mittens. The hat, since I had all that rest of that sweater, I went ahead and used the bottom part. It also had like a little pom-pom belt on it, so I cut the pom-poms off and sewed the pom-poms on the hat. Matching hat for our gloves out of a recycled $5 sweater. So that's the Bernie mittens. I hope you found this craft fun. It gives you a chance to recycle either a sweater you already have or one you can buy inexpensively. You can also recycle wool, felt clothing or coats or jackets or fleece. If you have an old fleece sweatshirt or something, you could do the same exact thing with that instead of using knit fabric. And actually the fleece is a lot easier because there's no unraveling at all, and you probably don't even have to zigzag, you just do it one stitch around. But so I hope this has been fun. Thank you for joining us today. This has been Angie.